Yeah, we need to mute something. I think that was that. Yeah, okay. Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Apologies for the slightly delayed start. There was a strategic planning meeting on beforehand, and the plan was they started, I think, at 2, and we were going to start at 7. They didn't get started because of some IT issues for an hour after until around 3 o'clock, but they did finish at 4 minutes to 7, so the plan would have worked had they not had the IT issues. Anyway, thank you for your patience in waiting a few minutes, and particularly to a number of members who've been here for the strategic planning meeting and are now carrying on through into this one. So apologies, Tracy. Thank you. Declarations of interest from members and officers. So on Chairman's announcements, first off, can I just remind all members of the committee that we have a Teams meeting tomorrow night about the role of the committee in the plan-making process. And now turning to tonight, I just want to set out how I intend to run this meeting. So first off, we got 3 members of the public, which will be 2, but we will have 3 contributions. Next, I will ask Rosie Humphreys, who's the originator of the call-in, to speak, and she'll be followed then by the non-members of the committee that wish to speak. And then we'll have a presentation from the from officers and portfolio holder, and then we can have a discussion from the committee and bring matters back to a resolution. Can I ask that all members try and be as succinct and make new comments and not the sort of I agree with him or her variety? And I have received and circulated to all members of the committee written submissions from 3 climate activists in the district. I will take those as read. However, when we do get to the debate stage and members wish to comment on those, they can do so. And just finally, one point, the last time this matter was raised at Cabinet, we did have some disruption. I do not expect that tonight. And if we do, I won't hesitate to adjourn the meeting and ask for the press and public to be cleared. So item 4, sorry, members.
Could I just ask, after the last Cabinet meeting, you also made some remarks about people who hold different views. Everybody's entitled to hold their own views about the subject in hand. Can you just give assurances that you will not, that everybody here will have an equal chance to be able to speak without criticism and without any sort of derogatory comments being made on them, whatever their views and wherever they're from?
Of course, I don't think I made any comments after the Cabinet meeting. Thank you. The members of the public, we have, hang on. Sorry, we have Mr. Miller? Right, so, yeah, carry on, sir. He told me he's also going to be speaking because Mr. Parsons has come down with COVID, so we wish him a speedy recovery, and he's going to make his own speech as himself, and then he's going to read out what Mr. Miller was going to say, although I suspect we all read it in the Cronenec earlier.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, councillors. So I'm Harry Miller, and I'm making a statement on behalf of Climate Action West Northamptonshire. That's Corn. Last May, Corn welcomed the arrival of a new administration, and we committed to collaborate constructively on providing real benefit to residents and local businesses. The new administration's pursuit of sustainability is especially welcome, particularly as it relates to developments that meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. That's the sustainability requirement of the National Planning Policy Framework, and nowhere better demonstrates the previous administration's failure to follow that framework than here in Towcester. Look around you as you leave this evening and you'll see an area transformed by a master plan that garnered millions of pounds of public and private investment. Yet the planners in the old council that ran from this building created a new local plan that is allowing the development of massive logistics hubs in open countryside on the town's fringe. These hubs will funnel traffic into and through Towcester. One expert witness at a recent public inquiry described the local plan as unplanning, and it will seriously compromise the health and welfare of future generations. Everyone assumes that a local plan approved by a planning inspector is beyond reproach. In Toaster's case, the local plan was deeply flawed, and I'll be setting out those planning flaws in a letter next week to the council leader. Moving on, Corn additionally welcomes your drive to improve the energy efficiency of our homes. As a social landlord, you'll know that by 2030, all your rented homes must have an EPC rating of C or better, but you may not be aware of the enormous scale of local need. Over 60,000 West Northamptonshire homes are estimated to require improvement to cut the costs of keeping residents warm in winter and cool in summer. As a unitary authority responsible for health and social services, you'll know that heat waves impact health. There are around 7,000 vulnerable residents, that's the under 5s and the over 75s, living in central Northampton homes that are impossible to keep cool during a heat wave. Householders need a great deal more from the council than a few energy efficiency advice pages on its website. All in all, our new administration has its work cut out delivering on its sustainability and environmental pledges. The voluntary sector, including Corn, recognises the contribution made by your dedicated and effective sustainability team, and I reiterate our pledge to constructively collaborate with you wherever possible. As a non-political action group, Corn will not enter a net zero political point scoring debate because, as I've said, there are far more relevant and urgent matters that need the council and the voluntary sector to collaborate on solving. And Corn will not hesitate to call out any council decision that is not in the best interests of residents and business. So for anyone interested, more details are on our website, cawn.org.uk. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And now do you want to speak on Mr. Pearson's behalf?
Yes, Dave Pearson, who is the co-leader of the West Northamptonshire Green Party, unfortunately has succumbed to COVID. And because I was here and the Chair's permission, I'm going to read what he had to say. So Dave Pearson writes that he had an interesting life. He'd been threatened with machine gun, evacuated from a civil war, and stayed put through 5 attempted coups. He knows the importance of leadership in a crisis. He says local government plays an important leadership role in addressing the climate and ecological crises. Research shows that the British people want the government to lead and even to speed up climate action. He says we don't want to be left alone to face and tackle the climate crisis as isolated individuals. People are noticing the floods, the heat waves, the rising food prices from falling crop yields, and what they are worried. We know that our own health and well-being depends on the health of our planet. Individuals must play a part, but unless action is spearheaded and coordinated by national and local government, people will rightly question our ability to reduce emissions quickly and fairly. We need a collective narrative from our leaders, one that sets out the scale of the challenge and the opportunity for action, a narrative that shows how we can rise to the challenge together. Scrapping interim net zero targets doesn't just undermine that narrative, it destroys it. People are worried that the transition will cost them money they don't have, and they want to benefit from the funding that climate projects can bring to the area. Leaders must design policies that ensure everyone has well-insulated homes, stable and affordable energy bills, and viable public transport options. Renewable energy is very popular, and research shows that the majority of people support their local authority in its approving new solar and wind projects. The oil companies have done an excellent job of undermining that transition. They have taken a neutral scientific measurement, net zero, and turned it into a weapon in their culture war. They're heavily funding political parties that will scrap net zero for them. The vast majority of British people want intensified political action on climate, but many assume that their fellow citizens do not. In this climate crisis, we need good leadership from courageous, well-informed people, people unafraid to attend climate crisis training, and people unafraid to disobey orders. I urge this committee to refer this decision, says Dave Pearson, back to the Cabinet for them to reconsider. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Philippa Knowles?
I'm 17. I cannot yet vote. Propose to take the word climate out of all of your documents when it's one of the greatest problems affecting people my age and younger. As these problems will affect my future more than yours, have you consulted people like me, not just some online survey that is hidden, but actually spoken to people of my generation and younger from all backgrounds? This overall lack of engagement is worrying for an elected council that is meant to make decisions on the behalf of all of West Northants. The problems of a rapidly changing climate have been taught to me since I started science, and the scientific explanations of how these problems have come to be has been compulsory in my education. So when the council that is meant to represent me cannot grasp these concepts, I lose faith. I've often heard arguments for this decision being that we in such a small area of West Northants do not create significant emissions in relation to a global issue such as climate change, so any change made is of little effect. This is untrue. The only way for change is to not deny the problem and act locally. All of us in this room have an impact. In fact, we as a country are ignorantly claiming to have greatly reduced emissions when we've only offloaded them to the countries with a high manufacturing base and importing their goods claiming low emissions for ourselves. An example of this is China. Now, I do fully understand and have seen for myself that China has its major problems and should not be idolized. But they have been often demonized for its high emissions. I've just returned from visiting my grandmother in Yulin, China, an insignificant city built off of manufacturing, and despite that, the efforts made to reverse CO2 emissions are obvious. Every car is modern and electric, and for everyday transport, electric mopeds are commonplace and convenient. Bullet trains run in all directions and are very affordable. My fare from the city Nanning to Yulin, a distance of 228 kilometers, was £9 and took an hour and a half. Solar panels are commonplace on top of people's houses and apartment buildings, and when taking the train, I could see from the window not only endless farming and countryside, but also fields of solar panels. And when flying into Shanghai, there are rows and rows of wind turbines. And the results of these efforts can be seen in my grandma's combined utility bills, £5 a month. When I currently do not have the power to evoke change or support the continuation of good causes, how can I trust that this decision is in my generation's best interest for its future, especially with the lack of due process from this council? And for the other decisions affecting other areas of my life here, can I expect that they will receive the same lack of care? Thank you.
Thank you. I invite Rosie to present her call-in request.
Thank you, Chair. The signatories of the call-in request are of the opinion that the decision made by Cabinet on the 16th of July is deeply flawed, of extremely poor quality, and contrary to our Constitution. You have in the papers our reasons for bringing the decision to this committee, so rather than reiterate what you already have in front of you, I shall focus simply on why it is the signatories' view that the decision is unconstitutional and potentially non-compliant with what is required of this Council by statute. The preamble to the Principles of Decision-Making section of the Constitution states that all council decisions will be made in the best interests of the communities of West Northamptonshire. As councillors, we are, of course, elected to serve all our communities, not just those who voted one way or another. Our Constitution states that decisions are made in accordance with the following principles. A, take into account all relevant considerations and ignore those which are irrelevant. B, compliance with finance, contract, and all other procedure rules, statutory requirements, guidance, and codes of practice. Of course, there are many other subsections, but I shall highlight simply these two. In relation to the Cabinet's resolution last month to scrap local net zero targets, read existing strategies in the light of this, and excise climate from climate impact and substitute environment. Was this a best interest decision or an unfortunate decision, exposing this administration as inexperienced and out of its depth with regard to its leadership and legal responsibilities and powers it actually has to enable climate mitigation and adaptation? The relevant considerations which have not been taken into account as regards scrapping local net zero targets are that local authorities are required by law to demonstrate leadership in reducing carbon emissions and use their spheres of influence in planning and transport, for example, to enable their area to be net zero by 2050. There must necessarily be staging posts along the way, and 2/3 of local authorities have set their own targets. These are targets, not absolutes, but without a roadmap as to how W&C will reach this, how are we to get there. The report offered no evidence as to why continuing with local net zero targets is unaffordable. So the Cabinet made a decision purely based on an assertion, contrary to all principles of good decision-making. Where are the figures on which this assertion is based? I'm sure that members will be questioning both the portfolio holder and the finance officer as to the absence of any figures. Specifically, members need to be informed of the following. What has been the cost on activity relating towards net zero targets to date? What funding has been accessed through grants, access to levies and the public sector decarbonisation scheme relating to net zero targets? What planned expenditure has been allocated in the 2025-26 budget relating to net zero targets? And finally, how will this decision affect existing procurement contracts, future contract negotiations and external funding opportunities? It appears that the portfolio holder does not recognise that councils can unlock significant economic, social and environmental value by delivering low carbon infrastructure, although there is a brief acknowledgement of this in the report, which says some major projects such as energy self-sufficiency were already based on making a positive financial return for the council. Where are the details of these positive financial returns? Basically, with whom did the Cabinet consult to ensure that they'd taken into account all relevant considerations? We're deeply concerned about the impact of this decision and the emerging local plan. The Council's planning policies must align with the NPPF of December 2024, which in paragraph 161 now specifically states that the planning system must support the transition to net zero by 2050, as well as the need to mitigate and adapt to climate change, which should also be considered in preparing and assessing planning applications, taking into account the full range of potential climate change impacts. A decision to suppress the word climate in all our policies and procedures and replace it with a more generic term could seriously undermine our position and put our local plan at risk. Our Executive Director for Place and Monitoring Officer, in my view, need to explain how the emerging local plan will pass its public examination next year if it is not consistent with national policy, including the net zero requirement. Without an up-to-date local plan, we'll have a developer free-for-all, which clearly would not be in the benefit, to the benefit of the residents of West Northants. Also, with regard to Resolution E, to substitute climate impact with environmental impact in Cabinet reports, we believe has not been taken into account the legal requirements set out in the Climate Act 2008 for local authorities to include climate impact in all their decision-making. The Act does not say environmental, it specifically says climate. Suppressing the word climate from council reports could be seen as a weakening of this requirement and potentially put the council in breach of the Act. To conclude, these are some of the reasons why the signatories to the call-in believe that the decision in question should be referred back to Cabinet. It's for other speakers to highlight the fact that so many businesses and individuals are already taking action towards net zero emissions. It's important that West Northamptonshire Council should support and promote such activities. And I'm now quoting from one of the submissions you received from a local climate group. Rather than adopting a policy of indifference, if the wildfires are burning, you need to put them out rather than walk away in the other direction or rely on the River Nen flooding to do the job for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Do members of the committee have any points of clarification that they want from Rosie, or is that all pretty clear?
Questions were, what has been the cost on activity relating towards net zero targets to date? What funding has been accessed through grants, access to levies and the public sector decarbonisation scheme relating to net zero targets? What planned expenditure has been allocated in the 2025-26 budget relating to net zero targets? How will this decision affect existing procurement contracts, future contract negotiations and external funding opportunities? And actually, I think I missed this one out. How much funding has the council already secured or was intending to apply for, which will be impacted by the removal of a key element of our sustainability agenda?
All right. Happy with that? Okay, thank you. Christine.
The decision to adopt the net zero targets in 2022 was a full council decision. The proposed scrapping of the targets has had no public consultation nor any discussion allowed by full council. I wonder what the driving reason was for bringing this to Cabinet rather than full council at this particular time. Councillors and residents were not presented with any facts at all to show costs and funding regarding activity related to net zero targets. The claim that we can't afford it, and even worse, the council leaders claim that it will bankrupt the council, with no evidence provided to that effect, must be questioned. This goes to the heart of how the Cabinet made their decision, which is far from open and transparent. Following on from Councillor Humphreys, I go on to section 1.22D of our decision-making principles, which requires that due consultation and proper advice is taken and consideration of alternative options before decisions are reached. My questions: what alternatives did this Cabinet consider and with whom did they consult in this regard? Councillor Stansfield has said to me, we are clear that this council was never able to achieve net zero. Whose advice did he take to draw this conclusion? What does Councillor Stansfield actually understand by the term net zero? What is Councillor Stansfield's understanding of offsetting and how this relates to net zero as opposed to carbon neutral? What is the issue here? Is it net zero, which is written into statute, or is it the interim non-legally binding target dates? Section E requires impartiality and the absence of bias, predetermination, or conflicts of interest. I conclude from the press release issued by the Telegraph at 6:07 p.m. and updated at 6:54 p.m. on the 16th of July that the Cabinet were predetermined in their decision and took no counsel from any alternative viewpoints raised on the evening of the Cabinet meeting. Who posted the press release which appeared in the Telegraph at 6:07 p.m? We know it was not the Council. How does Councillor Stansfield explain the press release confirming the decision being made before the decision had actually been taken? It seems to me that making a public announcement of a decision that has yet to be taken is unconstitutional and does not comply with the Nolan principles, specifically integrity, objectivity, openness, and honesty. Section G demands that reasons are given for decisions. To paraphrase W. Edwards Deming, statements without data are simply opinions. So I ask that this committee scrutinise the data to establish whether this opinion that we can't afford it is grounded in fact. Section J requires assessing the impacts on human rights, equality, diversity and sustainability. What exactly is the Cabinet proposing that we scrap? If we're already incurring costs as a result of having the targets, specifically what will this council withdraw in terms of services and resources in order to save money? What impact will cuts to activities or action relating to net zero targets have on the residents of West Northamptonshire? Climate-related risks to the environment and health will be experienced differently by our town and rural communities. Our most deprived, marginalised and vulnerable communities are at the most risk. An example is Castle Ward, which is the highest rate of COPD. Section L requires clarity of aims and desired outcomes. So my question, specifically and in detail, what will continue from the Sustainability Work Plan? Will our Sustainability Work Plan continue to utilise and be fully aligned with the UN SDGs, given the anti-poverty strategy, the health and wellbeing strategy, and others that are also linked to the UN SDGs? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Andrew?
Thank you, Chair. I read your memo about making sure that we try to concentrate on different things. So I am focusing on decision D or recommendation D, which was in the Cabinet report. And just to remind you what that said, it said that provides that all the Council's existing strategies on these subjects, notably the climate change strategy, the estate climate strategy, and the construction and maintenance climate strategy, be read as amended in line with this decision. So what does that actually mean? That's these three strategy documents. So if you look at the climate change strategy, it says very clearly, in its approach, that the targets associated with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal SDG 13, climate action, in particular, along with the Council's own net zero targets, form the core aims and objectives of the climate change strategy. Let me just say that again. The Council's own net zero targets form the core aims and objective of the climate change strategy. So by amending the strategy in line with the decision that the Cabinet made, we appear to remove the core aims and objectives of the Council's climate change strategy. How does that work? How can the Council have an adopted climate change strategy which sets out clear direction when that direction is no longer present? That has been removed by the Cabinet decision. It doesn't add up. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which is referred to in the Cabinet report, and which the Council supports all 17, we are told, number 13, as I've referenced, is the climate action goal. And to remind you what that says to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts. How can the Council continue to support the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal 13 on climate change without any urgent or timely commitments to achieving net zero? It doesn't add up. Or is the Council saying that it no longer supports that particular sustainable development goal? What is left in the Council's climate change strategy then? In this respect, the Cabinet decision has surely made the Council's climate change strategy unachievable. Rather than amending the strategy, surely the Cabinet's decision suggests more that the whole strategy has been dropped. Then you look at the estate climate strategy. This is about the Council's own activities. As we know, there was an original target to achieve net zero in those by 2030, but it's about the particular assets and the environment that the Council can control itself. This strategy identifies how the Council will achieve, this is what it says, at least net zero carbon in its estate, whilst maximising savings and income generation. It all goes on to say, delivering net zero in the Council's estate cannot be divorced from its wider goals, including to sustainability. How can that be amended in line with the Cabinet's decision? This strategy includes objectives on energy use. It's a good document. There's lots of facts and figures in it. You know, it sets out how the Council itself can change its energy use and contribute to net zero. It's a good document. How can that be amended in line with that decision? As an aside, last night, myself and Rosie attended a meeting at Crick Parish Council, and they have a climate action group, and they are organising through their Better Crick organisation a workshop for 2 days for residents to see how they can switch to cleaner energy. That shows leadership at a local level. Yet now we have West Northants Council with no direction and no leadership. Is the Council now out of step with the 57 councillors that attended last year's climate summit? Lastly, the construction and maintenance climate strategy. I won't repeat what I said in the previous two because, again, this makes a commitment to net zero and throughout the construction processes that the Council uses. So these three strategies were developed, I think, over a period of 3 to 4 years. They include they use evidence and facts to back up the proposed actions and have been fully subject to public consultations and input. Whether you agree with them or not, the Council previously had a coherent set of policies to tackle and mitigate against climate change. The Cabinet decision has created contradictions. It has ripped the heart and soul out of these policies. It simply does not hang together and seems based more on an opinion than evidence or fact. It also carries the risk that the Council will be more open to external challenge on the validity of its policies, particularly, as Rosie has mentioned already, in reference to planning policy. Dropping the targets has made Council policy directionless. Swapping the word climate for environment has made it ambiguous. I thought the new administration championed claims to be more honest and realistic with people, but by doing this, it is creating the opposite effect. The Cabinet decision has not been thought through properly, the impacts of it not fully understood or addressed or risks mitigated. It is a poor decision. I would suggest to the Scrutiny Committee that the Cabinet decision cannot simply be amended to amend these strategies. They need a complete rewrite, if now relevant at all. Surely, therefore, Chair, recommendation D from the Cabinet Sustainability Strategy Review needs to be referred back to the Cabinet. Thank you very much.
So I think that's dealt with all the members on the, sorry, Stuart, another one that signed the call. Sorry, you weren't on the list, but that's fine.
Thank you, Chair. I also have a very specific role. In this instance, we're going to be just concluding about what we would hope to get out of this meeting tonight. So my other colleagues have spoken very eloquently and in great depth on the necessity of the call-in and the legal and ethical obligations of this council when it comes to its sustainability targets. However, I want to build on this by looking at how we can move forward through some simple and achievable recommendations from this meeting tonight. We contend that the decision on the 16th of July to scrap net zero targets was a flawed decision that failed to follow our principles of decision-making. There appears to be a spectacular lack of data or information provided to support the administration's position. As such, the first objective must be to have the decision referred back to Cabinet to revisit and reconsider their choice. With the evidence presented tonight, I believe this should be the only logical conclusion that must be taken by the committee members. As has been highlighted, the lack of data remains a significant gap in the decision-making process, and it appears that there is little or no understanding of the climate emergency and the mitigation or adaptation options. I ask that the committee recommends a sustainability task and finish group to scrutinise and advise the Cabinet. This sustainability group would utilise legacy members from the previous Council Sustainability Group to ensure knowledge transfer and focus on building a specific and costed framework to deliver a reduction in our carbon emissions. A further recommendation is that the Cabinet do not censure the word climate in documents and policies, given the already pointed out legal requirements within various acts of statute. To censure the word will lead to confusion and obfuscation. To quote Dr. Johnson, words are but the signs of ideas, and keeping these terms clear highlights the importance of these ideas as a signpost and representation in people's minds. A doctor would not replace the word cancer with the generic term disease. Furthermore, we believe it is essential that, as well as the Sustainability Task and Finish Group, the Net Zero Implementation Group of Officers must also continue as a body within the Council. It is important that at the very least, the Council must acknowledge their legal requirement to achieve net zero by 2050, and part of this acknowledgement must come in maintaining this group. A final concern that we hope will be remedied in the meeting tonight is that we do not want to ever find ourselves in this position again in the future. This we believe can be by far the most easily solved, namely by the Cabinet and Council agreeing to make all future decisions in line with our principles of decision-making and the Nolan principles. We believe that if these had been properly followed in the first place, especially the principles of selflessness and objectivity, then this call-in would never have been necessary in the first place.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you.
So of the members who signed the call-in, the only ones who've spoken thus far are Liberal Democrats. Keith, you signed it, but you don't feel the need to speak if you don't wish to, but that's fine. Rufia's not in the room. Rebecca's not in the room. And Dave Tarburn's not in the room. So I'll now move on to, sorry, Keith, do you want to speak? Are you happy? Okay. I shall now move on to other members who expressed the desire to speak. You got Zoe and then followed by Bob.
Thank you, Chair. I wish to pick up on the false assumptions made that benefits for the public in West Northants and the pursuit of net zero are either or options. What the contained within all of the policies tied up within the net zero aspirations and targets of the council were extremely positive and necessary benefits directly affecting the people of West Northants. The most significant of these is air quality. We know it's particularly acute in Northampton. We know it's particularly acute in Castle, and we know that one of the most acute places in Northampton affected by air quality is Chain Walk outside the Barratt Maternity Home, where most young people born in West Northants take their first breaths. And I think that's something we need to be particularly aware of. We are seeing the impact of that in terms of people's health in West Northants, and we need to address that. If we can't address it in line with net zero, we've got no overarching aims. The same with sustainability within homes, the same with the impacts we take to mitigate the climate crisis in terms of flooding and heat. The actions we take, taken in themselves and falsely equated with value for money, I absolutely firmly know that the residents of West Northants need health and well-being and want to know that they are safe living in the area they live in, not only in Northampton, but air quality also impacts in terms of villages, because air doesn't stay still, it moves. The air pollution created in Northampton impacts our rural communities as well. And these are the impacts that at the moment have no targets, no aims. We haven't replaced net zero aims and the targets and the actions that came under it with a series of actions with clear targets, with a clear finish, with a clear criteria for success. And that's something that should be in place before any policies are scrapped. It is absolute nonsense to scrap policies and to scrap targets and to scrap approaches before they have been replaced with clearly publicly consulted documents and policies that we can follow up on as a council that allow us to measure how we are impacting and standing up for what our residents need. I believe that there is a false assumption that people are in line and are opposed to net zero, and it is not backed up by the vast majority of people that you speak to, people I've spoken to on the doorstep, however they were voting, have expressed concerns, and we should be acting in all of their interests, not just the people who voted for the who didn't vote for the administration, but the ones who did. And what we've seen here is biased decision making with no clear plans and no clear direction.
Thank you. Bob? And then John.
Thank you, Chair. I want to speak about leadership and policy coherence, picking up themes that have already been expressed. I'm seriously concerned about the impact of the Council's policy incoherence if we don't go back on this, because we've lost a consistent and logical approach. And that then impacts on our ability to provide local leadership on our journey towards net zero. One of the issues raised in the LGA peer review of the Council was the recommendation to strengthen the Council's role in strategic leadership in West Northamptonshire. And out of that came the One Northamptonshire Plan, to which I think the administration now has signed up. And that's an important strategic document for us as a council. Why do we need strategic leadership across our area? One is because we're a new local government area, so there are new geographies to be established. There's the journey towards new devolved structures, and West Northants needs a strong voice. And we're also a growing area, both in terms of housing and in terms of our economy. And that involves the opportunities to tackle climate change that brings. New buildings can be future-proof from the start. Future-proofing, we know, is more cost-effective than retrofitting. But we know this needs leadership. We need evidence, persuasion, and sometimes the stick of regulation and enforcement. We have the important power to convene across the economic drivers of this area. And we can then work in partnership with organisations which share our concerns. And if the planning committee this afternoon heard the excellent performance of the new DERF development and how that is leading the area. So I have to ask, why has the instruction come down from Reform in London? What makes this so important to reform? Who are the people who oppose the net zero targets? And to follow our chair's somewhat bizarre Facebook page entry, who are the people who oppose net zero? We have to follow the money. It's because reform is funded by people with an interest in the oil and gas industry. It has something to do with the 2.3 million they've received from oil and gas interests and people who are involved in polluting industry and climate deniers. That's 92% of their overall donations. It's unsurprising that this measure comes forward. So let's get back to some local leadership, local policies for local interests. Thank you, Chair.
John?
Chairman, members, thank you for the opportunity to speak on this item. Now, we all know that 2030 is just 4.5 years away. This administration works miracles, but this is going to take a bit longer. But that's really at the heart of this debate. Targets only mean something if they're achievable and funded. We could keep chasing dates that look good on a leaflet, but there's no money. If there's no money, no roadmap, there's no chance of delivery. Then we've all really achieved is a press release. We think residents deserve more than that. That's why Cabinet made its decision on the 16th of July, and officers have confirmed it is fully within budget and policy framework. I want to recognise the concerns of those who signed this petition. I know some feel we have ducked responsibility, or that changing the language weakens our commitment. Others worry about transparency while the council still accepts green funding. Let me be clear, we are not stepping back from environmental action. What we're doing is focusing on credibility and delivery. And on the point of funding, some have said it's inconsistent to drop 2030 while still accepting green money. In fact, the opposite is true. Those funds are going straight into warm homes, EV charges, biodiversity programs, and many others. The real inconsistency would be to take the money while keeping up the pretense of a 2030 target we knew we couldn't deliver. So let's look at what we are delivering. And here's quite a list of things, but it's only a small part of what we're doing. So for those, the ones that wanted figures, here's some figures. 2.6 million in warm home grants over 3 years. A local nature recovery strategy, 143,000 so far with more to follow. A new approach to grounds maintenance, less mowing, more meadows and grazing, and we spent £4 million on grounds. Over 1,000 EV charging points through new tenders. grants 2.9 million of capital and 0.6 million in revenue. A bus shelter contract with solar lighting and further solar power to reduce our own energy costs. And if we look at the total investment, that's 60 million. New cycling and walking paths like those at Delabury Park, 0.64 million completed and £5 million in grants. LED lighting upgrades across the estate so far, 158,000. We've got a tree and wood strategy, a parks development strategy with developer contributions, expanded biodiversity and energy efficient measures. The list goes on. And that's not theory, that's not wishful thinking, that's delivery. And here's the plain truth. There never has been a dedicated budget for net zero 2030. And that's the crux of the problem, ambition without resources. Some argue that dropping 2030 risks our reputation with investors. I'd argue the opposite. Investors like honesty and certainty. Across the country, 70% of councils who set a 2030 date now admit they won't make it. That's the real reputational damage, saying one thing and delivering another. Businesses want credible, bankable plans, not fairy tale deadlines that collapse under scrutiny. Let me be clear, the business case principle remains. If a proposal stacks up both financially and environmentally, we'll back it. The difference now is that we will test those proposals against a framework that we can actually be delivered, not against an arbitrary date 4 years away. And nothing in this decision removes our obligations under procurement or planning. Major suppliers will still need to show their own net zero path under procurement law. The planning system under the National Planning Policy Framework still requires climate mitigation and adaptation. Those duties remain unchanged. Now, it's important to say this. Net zero by 2050 is not optional. It's the law of the land, and we will play our part, our full part in that. But here's the problem. There is no clear national roadmap or secure funding that enables councils like ours to deliver it. In fact, the government's own carbon budget delivery plan was ruled unlawful in May 24 last year and must be rewritten by October 25. Until that national plan is clear, it would be dishonest for us to pretend we can do it alone in 4 years, what government has not yet mapped out for the next 25. We choose not to keep the 2030 and 2045 interim targets because they were unfunded, lacked a credible roadmap, and risked becoming empty promises. That's not abandoning the UK's legally binding 2050 target, which we remain committed to. It's simply being honest about what can be achieved here in the West Northants. I respect those who want 2030 reinstated. The urgency of climate change is real, and so is their passion. But ambition has to be matched with deliverability. Some have suggested creating another task and finish group. Scrutiny is welcome, but Cabinet has already committed to publishing clear progress reports. That's how residents will hold us to account, with transparency in delivery, not another committee. And finally, let's talk about the national situation. Some groups promise net zero by 2045, 80% renewable power by 2030, every electric car by 2030, and every bus zero emission by 2030. And that's less than 5 years away. It's a nice bedtime story, but residents deserve better than fairy tales. They deserve credibility, honesty, and results. That's why we've broadened climate impact into environmental impact, so that our decisions take into account not just carbon, but air quality, biodiversity, and the health of our natural environment. And to make sure residents can track progress, we will publish regular updates on the projects we are funding and delivering. As a member for Finance and a chair of the Pensions Committee, I also want to touch upon pensions. Right now, the council contributes about 60 million every year into pension funds. Where government allows, we are looking to widen the areas in which we invest, not just chasing fashionable green labels, but by focusing on investments that deliver stronger returns. And here's why that matters. For every 1% improvement in returns, it reduces our contribution by about 4 million. Those savings can be used to protect our services and support residents. Contribution reviews happen every 3 years, and we all know those 3 years come around very quickly. So tonight is about scrutiny, yes, but it's also about honesty. This decision is lawful, it is in line with policy, and above all, it is focused on the best use of taxpayers' money to deliver measurable environmental improvements for West Northamptonshire. That is the responsible course. Thank you.
Thank you, John. You shot your hand up. Well, we haven't questioned anybody else. Sorry, well, okay, fine. Okay. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Slope. So my first question to you, you keep talking about openness and honesty.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, we'll just
Well,
a
hang on.
couple of quick questions to
Quick-
John,
quick
if you want, on
questions,
what he
sorry.
has just said before.
yeah, I will do. The long list of things you've just talked about, all of that lovely funding and grant money, was actually the last administration's output, correct?
The funding or the spend or?
Or both? They were the last administration's output. There's nothing in their lovely list of EV charge points, the 60 million on solar, bus shelters with solar, Eleanor, that's all from the last
Yeah,
administration.
we haven't cancelled any of those,
No,
correct?
but to clarify, that was from the last administration.
Yes, it would have been. We've only been in administration
Thank
for a
you.
few months.
Thank
So
you.
yes,
So-
yeah, but we've
so-
definitely not cancelled any of those. In fact, we've grown upon them.
Thank you. So that's the honesty I'm looking for.
Yeah.
That was the output from the work that was already going on. I wasn't in that administration, as you rightly know, but I do think it's important where we can be straightforward and honest to show credit for some of the work that we've done.
I think it's generally accepted that after 2 or 3 months, we've heard some of the policies that still need updating, and there's been quotations from things that haven't been updated in the documents. So yeah, it's a new administration. We're still working, but these are things you say we act quickly in cancelling things, but we haven't cancelled any of the items that I've just spoke on.
Good, because that would have been a waste of money. My second question, if I may, you spoke earlier on about supply chain. So we're continuing with procurement supply chain for net zero targets for our suppliers, correct? For 2050.
I'm not the expert on that, but yes, it's built into the same questions that we have that's led by the 2050 government targets. Yes, it's still in place. Yeah.
So we're asking our suppliers to deliver 2050 net zero, but we have no plan of our own.
No, that's a legal target. As I understand it, 2050 is a legal target. And yes, that's incorporated within the questioning that we give to our suppliers.
Okay. Were you aware that I chaired a scrutiny working group on this particular issue around achieving 2030 net zero back at the beginning of the year as the budget was being evolved?
No.
Okay. Are you clearly aren't aware then a recommendation?
Yeah.
Last question.
Crack on.
Are you aware, therefore, that there was a recommendation that came forward for a costed plan for 2030 net zero? Because we all recognise it didn't exist.
Am I aware of the plan for 2030?
No, are you aware that there was a recommendation that there should be a plan?
That there should be a plan?
Yeah.
No, I wasn't. There should be a costed plan.
Which is the point he already made, which was there was no budget and there was no plan.
I think it's important that we're clear
that
that this is a scrutiny committee meeting. It's not an oversight committee, and I do think it's important that we are able to scrutinise. Thank you.
Yeah, fine. Sally, quickly.
Sorry, there's a couple of points. You've mentioned a number of times that there's no evidence of any actual outputs in terms of the climate change reduction things. Now, you and I would probably agree quite a lot in some of the criticisms of the previous administration. However, when I actually look at their emissions monitoring, they have made some real improvements. There are some real positive figures there, like, for example, heating, change against baseline, 17% down over 2 years. Fugitive emissions, 13.3% down over 2 years. Electricity, 3.5% down. I mean, it's not perfect, but it is real improvement and it's measured, which is really important. So there are figures there and we can see what happened, and it's a bit up and down, but it's changed in the right direction. Are you aware of those figures?
Yes, because what we didn't want to do, we wanted to follow the chair's guidelines and not repeat ourselves. I understand officers have got a presentation which is more feature-led. I'm the cabinet member for finance, so my particular angle, as it were, is from the financial side, but it's not just the financial side, which is why I brought others in.
The financial side.
So
I think it's also important to point out that both in the 2 years that we've published those sustainability reports, the total emissions have gone up.
Well, I said they've gone up and
Over
down.
since the baseline.
One is a one that's gone up and down, but there are some,
The total emissions against the baseline for the council are up.
they've got, it depends on which ones you look at. The ones which have been really problematic are the outsourced scope 3. But within the actual figures, it's very, you might just assume that things haven't performed very well, but actually I was quite surprised that they have. And looking at what's happened, bearing in mind there's changes around the change of working over the pandemic, actually the 2030 targets, just for the council, not for the businesses, but just for the council, was actually not far off. I mean, I was surprised at that because, as I say, I was no fan of the previous administration, but actually on this one, they had actually pretty good story to tell. Just on the climate impact, though, which is on the budget, and this again, if you look through the budget, it's right, there's not a neat sort of net zero sort of heading. However, on the monitor report, the most recent one, which you must have seen as a finance portfolio holder, it says all budget proposals being reviewed and where there's a potential for a negative impact on the council's sustainability agenda, suitable mitigation, etc., will be put in place. This includes potential for proposals to lead to an increase in carbon emissions, increases as a result of the need to provide services, etc. Any increase in carbon emissions will be managed as part of the ongoing work to deliver net zero. In other words, the budget was sensitive and the budget monitoring was sensitive to net zero and to the net zero impacts and to the kind of policies that were needed. So that seemed to me that the budget process for which you oversee, you must have seen if there was going to be a negative impact either on climate change or from climate change on the budget. You would have seen that, wouldn't you?
the difficult the difficult financial situation, and I don't want to overemphasize it.
You don't have to worry about that. I had to manage in much more difficult circumstances.
No, well, I'm not sure.
So I know them.
Tens of millions, but it's not a budget meeting. So, like common to other administrations that come into office, we adopted the budget that was set for us, and now we're having star chambers to find where this money is. But those particular items that you mentioned were in the original budget, and we've not changed those. It's been 2 or 3 months. We're working busily trying to do things where we're not cutting services in order to reach a balanced budget.
So where have you particularly had flagged up that the climate change, that the net zero commitments have impacted on the council's budget?
Where I've seen, I've personally seen chairing the pensions committees. That's one thing. When you're talking about contributions of 60 million a year, and a few of them were for green initiatives that we think we should really be looking to try and reduce the 60 million a year, try and reduce that by getting better returns on the investment. So that's one area.
That's
Individual.
ethical investments. That's ethical. That's a whole different issue. I'm talking about the current budget.
Yeah, but it still affects it. If I can bring 4 million a year by not investing in green only items just for the sake of it. With the budgets, we've adopted the budget and there were green items in there. Each individual portfolio holder is currently working through those to find out what they can do in order to balance their budgets for the next financial year.
Okay, thank you.
We're going to need to, well, thank you, John. I know there are a couple of other members in the room. Leader, do you want to speak or are you? Yeah, fine. And then we'll have the presentation. Yeah, other people weren't on the list either. With the members of the council that are not on the list, he's in the same category. Sorry, there were other members who did speak. Sorry, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. May I just, if with your permission, through you, Chair, just pass some feedback to our public contributors today. Mr. Mello, your thoughts are most welcome. You spoke of leadership, and that's what we have in West Northamptonshire Council today. I've seen references to inexperience, but I would argue that experience is growing by the day and is demonstrated through democracy here tonight. To Mr. Pearson, I'm sorry to hear you're poorly, and I wish you a speedy recovery. Thank you for your advanced sight of your statement, as the Chair pointed out in the press today. And again, I refer back to the leadership. And just lastly, to Ms. Knowles, you had the courage to turn up today and speak. I think all members will agree with me on this, that it's very, very important to have a young person's contribution to democracy. And thank you very much. Again, to the generations that are tomorrow, including yourself, our leadership is about demonstrating financial and fiscal responsibility. And I said frequently in the media after the decision was passed at Cabinet on the 16th of July, that this is ultimately about fiscal, financial, steady responsibility. And we remain committed as an administration to doing that for generations to come. It's not affordable, and you'll hear the testimony to that tonight. On the other points of our fellow parties in opposition, I'm still unclear on the Conservative administration's points. We have a local party here that is pro net zero. We have a national party, and the leader visited the area only a few weeks ago to Blakesley Show. Did not offer any insight into to why the local party backs net zero, but they don't. So I'll await clarity on that. To Lucy Rigby MP, who cancelled a meeting with me where I was hoping to raise the issue of getting a roadmap. We've heard applause today for Labour position, but we're still unclear on the roadmap to how we deliver 2050 net zero, which is a statutory requirement. So I was hoping to raise that with her at the weekend at the Rugby World Cup welcome ceremony, but sorry she didn't attend. So that was also sad that I couldn't raise that on the occasion. But I need that clarity, and when I do, to you, Chair, I will refer the response so it's in writing. And to our opponents in the Liberal Democrat team, I hear criticism. I've heard it frequently. I heard it from the BBC reporters earlier today. I still don't hear an alternative solution. It's just not what we're proposing to do. So I look forward to hearing the rest of the hearing today. But I just wanted to point something out, if I may, Chair. I've got a copy in front of me of the Municipal Journal, the Management Journal for Local Authorities. It's dated the 7th of August. The headline, I'll hold it up for the camera, but I encourage you to come and read it. It's called Not Zero, and it relates to the 12 core cities in the UK, stating now that they cannot hit the 2030 targets. They're all going to be missed. And for example, Glasgow, and I'll read you a passage. Glasgow City Council, which was forced to publish a revised route map to net zero last year, has suggested a transition to net zero that require a £40 billion investment package for heating projects, electric vehicles, charging infrastructure and renewable energy schemes. I don't think I need to provide further testimony that I did before and my members did to the Cabinet on the 16th, that it's simply unaffordable. And unless there is a route map from central government, and there doesn't seem to be one that clearly, we're talking such a vast amount of money that it's unquantifiable. And for members to say, let's see a budget for it when there was no budget before, then I simply don't see how we can do that. That's my part, Chair. Thank you.
Quickly.
Thank you, Councillor Null. The question at hand is about the quality of the decision fundamentally, and you can talk about your net zero position, we can talk about ours, but fundamentally tonight, this is about the quality of the decision. That's the focus of this committee. We have no power to overturn the 2030 decision one way or the other. However, you have several times on record talked about our aim to achieve net zero by 2030. If we pursued it, would bankrupt this council. Do you stand by that position?
Yes, Councillor Harris, I do.
Thank you. May I then ask a question, if I may, of our finance director?
Well, are they going to be, do you want to just hold that
I
point?
want-
Well, if I may, Chair, I will add to that.
I
It's
would
my
like-
interpretation it would
If you
bankrupt
just
the
hold that
authority if we
point,
pursue.
because-
I would like to ask that question now, if I may, because it's extremely relevant to the point
Okay,
that's being
fire
made.
away.
So, Martin, would you agree with that position that approaching or achieving net zero in the current format would bankrupt the council?
So categorically, I couldn't say one way or the other at this point. So because there isn't the evidence to back it up, there isn't the plan to get to net zero, it's not being costed. So I couldn't say whether it was affordable or if it wasn't affordable.
Thank you. So do you still stand by the position that it would bankrupt the council when we have no costings?
I ran some numbers. You could take an example, the previous administration's concept of buying more bin lorries and ordering diesel ones when electric ones would be needed to start the net zero plan. These vehicles cost in excess of £350 million each. We start running a number up. We can
350 million, thousand.
Sorry, 350,000 would be nice, wouldn't it? Sorry, it'd be a much easier
They're not
calculation.
that expensive.
Well, it's been a long day, Chair. Sorry,
So-
I stand corrected. Councillor Harris, if we would continue down this route as a simple example, we would be into tens and tens of millions of pounds. And
We've just heard from the finance director that we
if I
don't
may
have-
finish,
we don't have the numbers.
So the answer is no one knows.
no,
So you're both wrong or you're both right.
Yeah,
Thank
maybe.
you.
But,
Right.
but if I may, just
I'm
one,
just conscious of the time.
Of course, but one quick thing.
We need to move
have you
on.
heard of HVO fuel?
yes, I purchased much of it in my career.
Why do you think the solution to refuse vehicles is electrification when there's HVO?
There's many an option with bioethanol development plants and a number of options we can do, but they all cost money to create in the first place.
There's no
And therefore to
capital
create the
investment.
output.
There's no capital investment. You've just
Everything
changed
costs money,
the fuel.
Councillor Harris.
Of course it does.
Thank you. Sally.
Thank you. I was actually going to ask similar questions. It was about the comments which you made, Councillor Arnold, about the back of the fag packet maths which you'd done, and asked whether you had any more accurate information on the costs. It was in the news release that the interview that you did with the BBC. You told the BBC you had done some back of the fag packet maths, but the cost to turn the council's estate and fleet vehicles by 2030 did not add up. And I just wondered if now you've had a bit of time, if you've actually got more figures.
Thank you, Councillor Keeble. I should point out that I haven't smoked for a good 4 years, although I
I
seem to have
was
the
a bit-
gravelly
I was
voice.
a bit taken aback.
No,
by
I'm
that. I
partial
thought
to a
it
brandy
was-
and a cigar every now and then.
I thought that was
What I
a
will
good
add to that is, obviously, we're allowed the license in politics to make comments, and I will add to that, going back to the question about the refuse vehicles, when you add up the numbers and do a simple set of maths first, and you get to an incomprehensible number of capital expense when you know the financial outturn for next year's position is a lower number than the one you're already at, then I don't see how you can spend money you don't have and breach that budget. That's what I was referring to.
I can completely understand about the electrification, but presumably there's a number of different options for the fleet, which would include the different fuels. That you don't just have to go for EV, because that is probably, as an EV driver myself, that is probably not suitable for a bin lorry, I would have thought.
Well, it again goes back to the question of the size of the vehicle, the weights on the roads, the wear and tear, and also the range on a vehicle, and whether you need many more of them to complete the same range of a diesel-powered refuse vehicle or one that adds on biofuel. But I would add that if we look at electrification as well, and we're looking at the knock-on of that for residents, if we're encouraging that, we have an issue with power in West Northamptonshire and the availability of the grid. So if all our residents are driven down a road to go to EVs, we would simply simply have a problem of generating power to run these EVs on as well. So it's an issue bigger than this room today.
Well, perhaps we can ask the finance director more about the figures.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you, Chair.
we do need to move on. So we now have something from Stuart and Nigel. Are you going to put the presentation up? Yeah, you cry on. Yeah, it's easy.
Chair, sorry if I may. There were a series of questions asked by the people that signed the call in. Could I ask that those are responded to? Because again, it is a scrutiny meeting. So rather than hear initially on the presentation front, we'll get to that no doubt. I think it's only appropriate that we hear responses.
Well,
to
can we have
questions.
the presentation, and then if they still think those are unanswered, we can come back to them.
It's your meeting, you're
Yeah.
chairing.
Fine. Crack on.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. If we can go to the first slide. I've got 10 slides that take us through the background, moving through into some of the projects that we will could be continuing, and also looking at some of the data and the challenge at the end of that of meeting the 2035 as we go forward. Members have already identified where we started from in terms of the net zero. This was identified from a subgroup, a working group that was put together. It was intended to be a cross-organizational approach. The whole plan was about front-loading emissions as we go forward, following the broad reductions across all council operations. So again, everyone was set the task of looking at reducing emissions going forward. It was never the aim to get absolute zero. Question was asked, do we understand net zero? Net being the operative word. There was always that residual emissions was expected as part of this. It was always anticipated as well that there would be some sort of offsetting required at the end of this to reach the target. And I think it's the offsetting which is probably the area we need to concentrate on as we go forward. So again, when we came together as councils, predecessors had absolutely different approaches to action. They had no net zero target as a target. They have different mechanisms for calculation, different or mixed views in terms of what their emissions were for the different buildings and processes. So it was quite a challenge trying to unify that and collecting the emissions data. When we adopted the net zero target, there was no complete emissions data, and it's only probably in the last year that we've had that value of having accurate figures. So we set a target without data, and as I say, I think we're in good point now through the investors in environment, which is monitored and which we have to monitor against in terms of understanding where we're at. As has been said also, the approach was initially around the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as a framework. That remains. There was no requirement for net zero targets under the UN SDG framework, but it does require carbon emissions monitoring, and it does require us to monitor and take forward carbon reductions as we go forward. So again, a little bit of clarity in terms of the policy approach as we go forward. Again, I won't go into this slide in too much detail. I think members of Scrutiny are aware of the two targets and the Cabinet report that you are scrutinising tonight. Again, it's already been said, there was no budget set against this net zero. That delivery was always seen against spend to save initiatives. So we would only invest council money where there was a revenue or a capital return as a consequence, or that the government funding would be used. So when asked what impact has it had on budget, well, there is no budget to have an impact on. But again, I go on to how do we get to net zero in those final years. So the journey to net zero, the trajectory does identify a significant gap from where we are today to where 2030. And again, I'll have a graph that shows that clearly. Even maximising our current projects and our 2030 projection does take forward those. Oh, sorry, can we? Yeah, sorry. Even continuing all of that still leaves a significant gap to achieve the 2030 target. And the solution to that would be significant carbon offsetting. So the market for offsetting is becoming very lucrative. We have a sustainability team that's talking to lots of other councils. We've just had a conversation with Devon, who had £500,000 to invest. They went to the market in terms of offsetting, and they've said, we're not in the market for sale at the moment because of the 2030 target. So when we're asked how much will offsetting cost, we really don't know, because the market is waiting for the councils reaching the 2030, and then there will be a competition or a competitive process in terms of values. So we're expecting offsetting, and the market is expecting offsetting to increasingly grow in terms of value as we go forward. In terms of projects, I think it's clear from what Councillor Soap said, we are not stopping anything. However, any new projects we're coming forward, we are doing that invest to save model, which was identified right at the start of this process. And we're also looking at the benefits for local communities is an additional aspect of this as we go forward. So again, I won't go into detail. I think they've already been identified. If we go on to the next slide, again, other projects that Councillor Slope has already identified. In terms of emissions and where we're at, sorry, the next slide. This shows, as Councillor Keeble mentioned earlier, there are three aspects to counting your emissions. Scope 1 is the energy we burn being the operative word in layman's terms. So if you drive a car, you burn the petrol. If you light gas, you burn the gas. So that is what the council actually uses itself. The yellow Scope 2, which one's that? Blue is the council's use and burning of carbon, making its own carbon. The yellow or orange is the electricity, basically. So somebody else has burnt carbon to make the electricity, we use it. So that's the carbon emission there. The third element, Scope 3, is that of our contractors, as Councillor Keeble clearly stated. So when you think something in like home to school transport, where we've got a whole fleet of taxis and buses that are external to us, that obviously comes with quite a carbon cost in terms of what we need to look at and understand for net zero. So again, just moving on, changes following the removal of targets. As I've said previously, I expect and hope that all projects to proceed going forward. All future energy and water reduction projects will continue. We found that when you cut carbon, you usually save money as part of that. When you save water, you usually save money. It does get to an extreme where the lowest hanging fruit is gone and you get to the top of that tree where it does become more expensive than you save. So it's understanding where we get to in those individual projects. However, all projects will be subject to that financial view as we go forward. So lots of conversation there about will we electrify, won't we electrify, what will we do with our fleet, etc. My suggestion is we will look at all options and we will use the same processes that we were identified by the subgroup in those early days. We will look at the relative financial costs of that. We will look at the value for money. And if it wipes its own face or saves money and has environmental benefit, then we will continue with those projects. We are absolutely committed to looking at whole life costs of buildings, again, making sure that we build in the sustainability of that. And again, we will continue the Investors in the Environment accreditation, which gives you that transparency of how we're achieving as the council and how we're moving forward. So again, Chair, that's hopefully provides some context and understanding from an officer point of view of what this decision means.
Nigel, do you want to add to that? Yeah. Yeah, well, you can come to a microphone to the people on YouTube and that can hear you.
Chair, can we ask officer?
Well, you can ask
questions
a question of, yeah, I was going to take the two together, but yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everybody who's attended tonight and all the relevant questions. Thank you very much. So, obviously, as we've just heard, the proposal we put to Cabinet on the 16th of July was within the budget policy and framework. It was all legal. So there's been some questions about the legality of it all. As you're all aware, well, Cabinet people, officers and members will be aware that all issues, anything that comes to Cabinet has to go through the legal process before it comes to Cabinet. So any decision we made in Cabinet would have been legal. So just get that clear before we start. Yeah. The purpose of the report was to basically revise the Council's climate change. Yeah. This was allowed us to focus our resources on projects to deliver the greatest benefits to our residents. Aligned with the new administration policy, no longer pursue the current 2030-24 net zero target. Like you say, on March 2022, the Council adopted Sustainable Northampton's broader sustainable strategy that moved beyond purely climate focused, and it went to pledge for net zero. So, but that was, unfortunately though, that was put in place. You put a target in place, but you didn't even know the starting point because you didn't have that data. Yeah, you used, you know how you can put a policy in place without even knowing the start of the data. I'm not sure. So that was the point. And pardon? Yeah. So we, as a council, yeah, you put. Thank you. Well, I wasn't there, so you, not me. Thank you, because I wasn't there. Thank you very much. Well, that's good. Right. Anyway, so a policy was put in place, and it wasn't. There was no data to even start where the starting point was. So they didn't even know where we were starting from. And obviously, as we've heard, there was not a single penny of funding put in place for this. Yeah. So how you can change your goal from 2022 to 2030, which, 8 years, and now we're down to what, 4.5 years. Yeah. With no money, I don't understand how you could do that, especially with the council finances as they are at the moment, and how have they been over the last few years, and how are they going to get worse over the next few years. So we fully acknowledge the central government target of 2050, because that is legally binding, yeah, and we've never said anything different from that, yeah, because it's legal. But again, they've got no proper framework at the moment. In fact, it's very good, Councillor Slope highlighted today that the government's own carbon budget delivery plan was ruled unlawful in May 24 last year. It must be rewritten by October 25. So even the government, their own carbon budget delivery plan was ruled unlawful. So how can we have a plan when they can't even have their plan? No. So setting earlier targets, risk being misleading or financially irresponsible. I think it's both. I think we're misleading the public. You can all say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, but if you've got no money and you've got no process of doing it, then it's no point. Or financially irresponsible. Yeah, we haven't got the money to make us net zero by 2030. Yeah, all the members are fully aware of that, and all the council officers are fully aware of that. Yeah. Right? No, I didn't say bankrupt, did I not? Thank you very much. We failed to meet the target. We undermined the public trust, and I think that's what the history of Northampton councils have done over the past number of years. All the time I've lived here in the last 35 years, every single council has proved to have got no trust from the public, and that's why we're sat here today. We divert millions of pounds away from essential services that were already under immense pressure, and looking at the budgets. Obviously, we're about to go to Star Chambers and look at next year's budgets, our own budgets, not your budgets. Yeah. And looking at them budgets, you know, it's not a pretty picture, and we're all going to have to take more money out of the budget. Across the county, councils are facing, across the country, sorry, councils are facing demands with insufficient government support. A recent national survey, obviously, we found that 70% of council officers had little or no confidence in meeting the net zero targets. And we just had a publication read out to you where basically now even large city councils and organisations who have obviously got very large budgets, yeah, even now they're saying that they even haven't got enough money to do 2030, or they will not even get there by 2030. The tools for funding to deliver best outcomes for our residents and our environment. That's what we have to do. We have to look at our residents, that's what we're doing. And we've got to be very trustworthy. We're not carrying on to keeping the net zero thing to 2030 would be untrustworthy to the public. If you were to continue our current path, we would likely need to spend millions on carbon offsetting. And yes, I do know what carbon offsetting, thank you, is. Yeah, and I've actually just looked on my graph of how much carbon offsetting is set to grow, and it's only going one way. It's going like that. And as Stuart has already told us, that as we get towards that 2030 target, and everyone's trying to get to the councils who want to stick within that target, then the cost of net zero will rise by a lot. And again, money we don't have. The past administration purchased electric diesel bin lorries. In fact, you cover this area. They're actually 8-wheel ones this time, so they probably might even burn a bit more diesel than the previous ones. So they looked at having electric ones or biodiesel or anything else. They just purchased electric diesel ones because obviously that's what they could afford. That's what probably they could do, what could do the rounds, what would be more cost effective, and that's what was purchased. If they were very serious about 2030, then they wouldn't have purchased them vehicles. The new vehicles, what arrived a few weeks ago, wouldn't have been diesel vehicles. They wouldn't have been they would have maybe been run by biogas, or they would have been electric. They're not. We're here to deliver for the people sustainable strategy that supports our communities, helps our businesses, and reflects the financial realities that we face as a council, what we've been left behind. Yeah. This does not mean we're going to abandon our environmental responsibilities. We will continue to build on excellent work already underway. Yeah, I fully say that. Yeah, thank you for all your efforts and all these great schemes that are coming online at the moment. Where's it, my paper? Sorry. No. So yeah, so obviously we've got the Warm Home Grants, which is great. Thank you very much for that. We've got a local recovery nature strategy. Yeah. We just passed obviously at the last council meeting, the cabinet meeting, we also had the park strategy, which is going to obviously rewild a lot of our spaces, our parks and country parks within WNC. That will actually lower emissions. Yeah, that is good for the planet. Yeah. New cycling, we've had a EPB, we've been talking about new cycling, walking paths, LED lighting upgrades, we've got a trees and wood strategy, we've got parks development, we've got the expanding. We're going to obviously hope to expand the parks strategy so we can actually gain from net zero by having where builders have to have so much environmental impact in their within their development, and we will be able to sell them credits because we will have them in areas by rewilding these areas.
Are we done?
Yeah, we're done. There's no.
Okay, so we got questions then for either Stuart and or Nigel. So, sorry, Fiona. Can you put mic on, please?
Sorry.
It's just if we don't have the mic, you might hear it in the room, but you won't hear it on the recording.
I'm not going to pick up on all of your points. I'm going to pick up on a few. Just the first one is, you talked about misleading information and you are basically accusing the previous administration of misleading information. And yet you are sitting here tonight, along with other people, giving or presenting as fact what is essentially subjective opinion and conjecture. How can you sit there with all consciousness and accuse other people of giving misleading information when you are sitting there spouting nonsense based on subjective views?
No, we're not spouting nonsense. We've been realistic and truthful with the public. This council will not reach net zero by 2030 without carbon offsetting.
Right.
Yeah.
So on that, so I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you that the two targets are not very ambitious and potentially not achievable. But why are you sitting here and the only thing that you seem to be looking at is in absolutes? This is an either or. This is maintain or scrap. Is there not a middle ground of saying, well, hang on, we need to look at this in the context of where we are nationally and locally, of where, as my colleague has said, that it's already been decided that what is absolutely needed here is a costed, planned out, detailed model in order to say, is this achievable or not? Or in what guise can this be achievable or not?
Why didn't we do that in 2022?
Well, it was because it was decided this. I can't answer that question, but what I can tell you is that earlier on this year, that was the decision. So I would actually put that back on you and say, before making unfounded and unsound decisions, why haven't you done the full analysis?
With every way you look at this,
if I may finish.
Sorry.
So why have you not done the full analysis so that you can actually make a credible and clear proposal that is then actually democratically consulted on rather than making unilateral dictatorial decisions?
You've just seen emissions data, yeah, and it goes to last year, yeah. The last one for this now was 23, 24. Obviously, we haven't got this year's yet. As you can see, if this carries on till 2030, we'll still have a massive carbon impact.
And so I'm going to go back to my question, if I may. Why are you only looking at this in absolutes of scrap or maintain, not actually look at going back to looking at data, looking at a fully costed model with detail? Because from what we're seeing here, so many of these elements that have already been put in place are set to continue anyway.
Yeah.
So actually, what it feels like we're actually sitting here looking at is a version of the same thing, but just with a different wording and wrapping around it.
No, we're being honest that in 2030, if we haven't reached that target, we won't be spending public money on trees.
So I go back to my original question. Why are you looking at this in absolutes of scrap or maintain, i.e. we either have to achieve the 2030 for scope 1 and 2 and 2045 for scope 3 for the wider, or we make scrap or maintain? Why is there not an option to look at a middle ground of review and amend?
Because we are being responsible and truthful to the public by saying that this is not achievable and we will not achieve it. However, and it's totally unaffordable. However we look at it, we could have committees after committee. We could have committee after committee after committee. Yeah, it's not going to make the financials any better. Northampton thing. It's not going to make net zero any better.
You say something is not affordable when you haven't even looked at it as an option.
Right.
But the inverse of that is true. You'd have to accept as well, Fiona, that we have a target that we do not have a budget for and we do not have a plan for.
I've said that.
Yes, so
what's the point?
The inverse of that is equally true.
If I might, Chair, absolutely. And as I've said, what we seem to be looking at here is it has to be either or, i.e. scrap or maintain. Why are we not looking at a potential middle ground of saying net zero has its valuable benefits? I've got a number of things here that I really want the opportunity to say rather than question.
Okay, we'll get that in a minute.
Yeah, it has its benefits, but this doesn't have to be a scrap or zero. I agree. Yeah. I don't actually think that 2030 and 2045 is achievable, but that doesn't mean that you throw the baby out with the bathwater.
We're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We are sticking to the 2050 plan by the government because that is legally in place. And also by then, the technology will be totally different, right? We will have the technology to have net zero vehicles, and they will be fully cost funded. And they'll be able to, as we've all seen, the cost of electric vehicle has come down massively.
I
Yeah.
think that
The
you are
cost of,
looking at-
no,
you
but
know,
we
sorry,
haven't
you are
got,
looking at real specifics
that we
here.
haven't even got the power in our, within Northampton to power the new buses what are coming online.
I'm sorry, Chair. I think that we may as well end this here because I think my colleague doesn't seem to understand the concept
Okay,
that I'm saying here.
Fine. Sally,
Thank you. I've got a couple of, I mean, I agree that.
can you
when
use the mic, please?
Sorry, when you look at the budget, you don't see a budget, you have your budget line for adult services, you have your budget line for school transport, you don't have a budget line that says climate change or net zero. However, my understanding from the presentation that we've heard so far is that climate change is a cross-cutting theme. So you don't have a particular, and one of the problems with local government is that it does work in silos, and the real transformation often comes through cross-cutting themes. The net zero one is a cross-cutter, and therefore it's managed from within the departmental budgets. So it isn't disaggregated, and that actually provides a much better opportunity for portfolio holders to get a grip on what's happening in their area, to transform the spending, to transform the services and the outputs, and then make sure the budget fits with that. It isn't always going to, because budgets are tight, you know, and they have always been. So there's nothing particularly new about that. Wouldn't you accept that that's a perfectly logical, well, it's a perfectly reasonable way that lots of local authorities can and have worked? And as we've seen through the figures we've had, it has achieved some real transformational change in West Northamptonshire.
There is, I agree that the carbon, obviously today at the EPB, we were given the latest micro park figures. So there's 143 centres around Northampton, obviously. And nearly all of them, it is falling, yeah, because there's more electric vehicles on the road as they become more affordable, and that will continue. And by 2050, because obviously the government want to scrap, you won't be able to buy a diesel vehicle anyway, but after 2035, yeah. So obviously by that time, net zero will be achieved, but it'll be achieved in a long-term way.
I think you're answering a question which I didn't ask, but there's a second thing, which is that, you know, sorry, there's a third question that it seems to me you're keeping the, you're saying, okay, the government's agreed that, so we'll go along with that for want of anything better. But actually, where you've really got the leverage is that as a local authority, you can set local goals and targets and get partners to work to it. And you've been very effective about that. We've been very effective actually about that. So don't you think that by scrapping the local targets and just keeping the sort of national, okay, we'll go along, you know, we'll go with the flow approach, that you're going to reduce the opportunities for real change? And then I'm going to come to the third question, which is on your particular portfolio area.
Okay.
Yeah?
Right.
The particular point about the portfolio is that you're responsible for flooding, and flooding is where climate change meets Northampton, because we had 4 times last year. We had Billing Aquadrome evacuated repeatedly. We had the station looking like it was something from a different planet. And you're the person responsible. You talked about trust and so on. You're the person who's on the Anglican Northern Regional Flood and Coastal Committee, yeah?
Yeah.
I don't see your name down as being present at the last meeting.
That's because at the last meeting, I was on a flying duty and I wasn't unavailable.
That's nothing to do with the cabinet decision.
Yeah. Okay,
So
but you're going to go to the future ones and make sure.
When I'm available,
that
I will go to every meeting.
Because that is absolutely key.
Right, okay.
Right.
If you want a substitute, I'll go for
Okay,
you,
look,
because it's a key issue.
I realise them meetings
let's
are
try
really
to
important, and I
Not
just
Dave,
want to
don't rabbit
attend.
holes here.
Okay, if I may, Chair, we are going down rabbit holes because tonight is basically about the quality of the decision that's been made. And I'm very confused because I've heard you talk about we haven't got the money, we've got no budget, but we could end up diverting millions of pounds. We've heard that we have no costings. So can we agree that as it currently stands, we actually don't know what it would cost us to achieve net zero.
Right, so let's just stop
It's
that.
just a simple
because-
question,
Right,
yes or-
right,
yes
so
or no.
let's do one item, yeah?
It's just a
Home,
yes or no
school,
question.
no, I'm not doing this, no. Home school transport. At the moment, that is costing this council over 20
It's not answering the
million,
question.
no, over 20 million pounds.
It's right.
Most of them vehicles, I guarantee you, will be diesel vehicles. Yeah. If we then say to them, by 2030, we want all your vehicles electric or biogas and everything else, what do you think that budget will turn into?
But hang on. I think actually there's more agreement here than you want. You're trying to go down a rabbit hole here. I have a lot of sympathy for what he's just said there. We don't know how much it would cost to turn our homeschool transport net zero.
So Chair, don't
We don't
disagree.
know that.
But
We've never done
can
the
we
exercise.
just ask that-
Is it going to be cheaper?
Just please ask that our speakers, when we are here as scrutiny, and just ask them a question, please can the question just be answered? That's
Okay,
all we're
well,
asking.
No, you asked me a question and I've answered your question.
so-
I took one
Okay, can I-
one
can I get
item
So
question,
another
please?
question.
where the
right,
budget
just-
would be
Yeah,
affected.
thank you, Nigel.
Okay, my
Jonathan.
next question. Did you attend the statutory consideration in lawful decision-making session held on the 19th of June?
No, I didn't.
Okay, so are you aware of what the content was of that session on the 19th?
If I didn't attend the meeting, I wouldn't be, no.
Okay, so that session was about the
I'm not
council's-
sure whether I attended the session. Obviously, we've had a lot of training in our short
So you
time.
don't know
in-
whether you were there or
Sorry.
you weren't?
Can you make your point?
Okay,
Yeah.
so the point is that session was specifically about the legal responsibilities of the council when it comes to climate change and adaptation. So are you aware of the acts that the council has to respond to in response to climate change and adaptation?
Like I've just said at the beginning, everything what comes to cabinet has already gone through the
That's
legal
not-
process.
That isn't the question.
No, so we
sir.
wouldn't,
That
we
isn't-
wouldn't know. Everything that goes to the cabinet is a legal process. You're trying to say that we are not law abiding and broken the law.
what we're
We
trying to-
haven't because we wouldn't be
Councillor.
allowed to.
Councillor, could you please answer the question? Are you
What-
aware
what-
of the
what
acts
is the
that are
question?
relevant? Is he aware of the acts that are relevant in regards to the council's responsibility for climate change and adaptation?
I'll pass that to Stuart.
Well, it's a question to you as portfolio.
I'm passing it to my
Okay.
council officer, responsible
fine.
officer.
Fine, okay. We've heard the answer. Right, Stuart.
That's no then.
That's a no.
Well, you can take that as you
We
want.
can infer it as we want.
So,
I'm not putting words in anyone's mouth. Stuart.
Just in terms of the cost and the finance side, I don't think any council in the country can possibly know what that would be. But what we are clear about is what the challenge is at 2030. The graph that I identified showed where we would expect to get from that point. As the chair identified earlier, emissions have gone up each year. We do expect it to come down by 2030, but there is still approximately 17,000 tonnes of carbon we need to offset because that has been achieved on the basis of all of the projects that we think will come forward. Now, it is an assumption because we don't know what government grants are going to come forward for what reasons. But we do know that based on that current level, that's a significant amount of offsetting we need to do. Again, as I said in the presentation, all we know is from the market at the moment that that cost will go up significantly as the opportunity for offsetting becomes more apparent with the all the councils that are meeting 2030 that need to offset. So it is going to be a significant sum of money, and that's not for 2030, that's 2030, and then the next year, and then the next year, and then the next year. So this isn't just a one-off offsetting, it's a year on year till we get to net zero. So that is the challenge.
But again, uncosted and assumptions currently. And the point also is net zero is not reliant on offsetting. Its primary driver is emission reduction, not offsetting. That's carbon neutral.
Sorry, But to get to net zero, when we look at the carbon that we need to reduce, and there's even a question, even if we did that offsetting, because you're right, offsetting is the last option. It is scorned on by the investors in environment, etc., etc. If we did the amount of offsetting and actually paid that money, there is a chance that we still wouldn't achieve net zero, because people would say your offsetting is far too much to be credible. So even that credibility is at risk. So we might pay all that money, whatever it is. We don't know what it is because we don't know the cost. But we may well still find that we haven't achieved net zero because the people who arbitrate this may well say that's not the right way.
If I may, can I come back to the quality of the decision, because that's what we're here to debate, and we keep going down the net zero discussion. And yes,
Well,
I am.
that's what we're talking about. I thought we were here to discuss net zero.
No, actually, we're here to discuss the quality.
It's
of
the cabinet decision that we're reviewing, so.
Yes, so I have a couple more questions,
Right.
if I may, Chair. Thank you very much. So are you aware, therefore, of the responsibilities of this council under the Climate Change Act of 2008?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Are you aware of the council's responsibilities under the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004?
No, because I'm not, again, I'm not planning and I'm not housing. Thank you.
But you are the portfolio holder for sustainability.
No, I'm the portfolio holder for environment, waste and recycling. I'm not the portfolio holder for housing or planning. Thank you.
Okay. Stuart, can you help with that?
Again, with any administration, officers are there to help assist and direct. So when we have conversations with any member, we will make sure that that's our role, is to guide and ensure that any decision that is made within the acts and the relevant acts. So
Okay,
again, you'd expect me to say that.
So the reason, of course I would, the reason I raise it is I have a copy of an email which I believe was sent probably from the chief executive the day after the cabinet meeting, which specifically says that I need your help now to remove references, this is to staff, remove references to net zero and referring to environmental impact instead of climate impact within our reports, policies and strategies to better reflect the broader focus. Those two acts that I've mentioned, particularly the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act, is linked to local planning, which specifically requires councils to mitigate and adapt for climate. So that is an issue, a question for the monitoring officer. My question arises there, if we were to embark on this route of simply eradicating or suppressing, I think as my colleague used the word climate, how are we going to comply with a local plan, with NPPF, which specifically in section 14 now talks about climate adaptation and mitigation? So I can't see how we can avoid the word climate. So if we're talking about quality decision, park your net zero for a moment, how can we eradicate the word climate and be compliant?
Do you want to take that on?
Thank you, Chair. If I just review the recommendations.
Sorry, for those of you not familiar with this, Sarah is the Chief Legal Officer to the council.
Thank you.
More known as the monitoring officer, but she is actually the Chief Legal Officer, really.
As well.
In plain English terms, so
Thank
just
you.
for the benefit of anyone watching or in the room.
Yeah, so I think it's just useful to point out, isn't it, that the recommendations from that report specifically referred to changing the cabinet report heading from climate impact to environmental impact. It then specifically talked around making changes to existing strategies to reflect and to be read in line with the decision. But there wasn't anything specific that said you absolutely have to remove the word climate from all those policies.
That's what this communication says.
And which communication is that, sorry?
I believe it's from the chief executive the following day. But
Well, I mean, I don't have sight of that communication and I can't comment on the...
Okay.
on
But you don't know who it's from
or
either.
the basis of it,
not
no.
100%. It could have been from the council leader, but somebody wrote to staff with an explicit instruction.
I'm not sure we can have something that somebody wrote something to someone.
No.
Well, I didn't write it. I didn't make it up.
Okay,
So-
fine.
And if I can come back, Chair, then it's just to say, obviously, what we do is we work with the recommendations that are actually specified within the report, not a document that may then have been, you know, an interpretation of that document that may have been sent.
In any
subsequent to
event, the
us.
decision it has not been activated, so that was probably jumping the gun if it was written. Because the decision is on hold and The very earliest it would be activated would be later on tonight if this committee decides to do nothing. And the next one will be cabinet if they decide to carry on, if we decide to put it back. So, and just to follow up on that, Sarah, is there anything in the decision, because there was a couple of points about lawfulness and unconstitutionality, that in your position you consider to be either unconstitutional or unlawful?
No, no.
Thank you.
As has been correctly stated already, the reports that go to cabinet are signed off and approved by the statutory officers to check the lawfulness of them. So no, I'm happy with the reports.
Right.
Can I ask a further question then?
Right. Last one, and then I do want to take a quick
basis-
break.
On what basis did you allow a call in?
It met the terms of the Constitution. Obviously, in terms of allowing a call in, there is a set criteria there. If members have concerns around the quality of decision making, that call in process is there to enable for that to be debated.
Yeah. So you can ask the question: was it lawful? Was it constitutional? You've now got your answer. Okay.
So everything's open to interpretation.
And then I'm going to have we've been at this 2 hours, and then I'm going to have a break.
I just wanted to make in response to what Councillor Harris was saying, that in calling paper.
Hang
you're
on,
referring-
if you want to debate Councillor Harris, can we just wait until we have the break and come back, and then we will have a committee discussion and debate. I think it might be better then.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. So I think we've been at this now best part of 2 hours, so I suggest that we take a 15-minute comfort break, and then we'll reconvene at 9:30 by that clock. They're all different. Oh, it's only 7 minutes past 9. Oh, sorry, that's the problem with this one. Oh, there's not one over. There used to be one there, and one there, and they were all different. Oh, it's 7 minutes past 9. Sorry, we'll reconvene at, say, 20 past. Sorry, we'll reconvene at 20 past by. sort of heard from anybody that wished to speak. We now wish to have a discussion amongst the committee. So, sorry. Yeah, we'll come on to that, Cam. Can I just remind the committee then what it is we need to achieve, which is we have really two options. We can decide at the end of our discussion that the committee is content with the decision that Cabinet has taken, because our role here is to review the Cabinet decision and then say, well, we're content with that decision, in which instance that decision would stand and would be effective then as of tonight. Or, having considered all the reasons, we can refer it back to Cabinet with additional things that we wish Cabinet to consider and look at. And that could be to strengthen their decision to add things in, or to take things out, or to add alternative recommendations from the one that Cabinet took. I don't think it does fall outside the budget and policy framework, so we don't have that option to worry about. So those are the two options really that we have before us. Do something, refer back, but if you're going to refer back, you're going to have to come up with the reasons and for doing so, or take no further action, in which instance the Cabinet decision will stand. So, members of the committee, from what you've heard, we might want to get into a discussion here on the Cabinet decision, not the rights and wrongs of net zero, not the rights and wrongs of EVs versus diesel cars, or anything like that. It's about our Cabinet decision. So, who wants to go first? Fiona?
Thank you. So, in my view, there is absolutely no doubt that the current net zero targets in terms of the dates for the Council for 2030 and for the wider West North Hants for 2045 are ambitious and also possibly now unrealistic in terms of timescale. I also agree that 2045 target for the wider area, i.e. scope 3, is actually beyond the control of this council. And although I would say that, you know, a robust and credible sustainability leadership by the council can contribute greatly towards achieving that. And I really don't think that that is being taken into account sufficiently enough and should be looked at being almost just sort of thrown out. I also fully agree that the case-by-case basis, which is actually in the strategy for each of the individual activities, is not sufficient to achieve a coherent plan for achieving the targets, and that a really fully detailed and costed plan of action is just fundamental and critical. And as my colleague said, you know, this was actually recommended to be undertaken early this year, but it hasn't been fulfilled. And I think before any further discussion on this or misinformation is perpetuated, that activity must be undertaken for clarity and credibility and a sound basis for discussion before any further decisions. I also don't understand, and as I've said this, why this seems to be a choice of either scrap it or maintain it, which is, I've seen from the Cabinet decision, there are 4 options that have been set out. Option 1 and 2 is maintain. Option 3 is just go ahead with the activity but not have the targets. And option 4 is that we just sort of scrap it all together. You know, there needs to be, given what I've just said, a sensible ground for looking at a middle ground that serves and supports both national agenda, but also accommodates local realities, you know, in terms of finances and everything else. Firstly, as well, but there was no consultation. And I know that, Sarah, you have said that there didn't necessarily need to be constitutionally, but the council and the cabinet is here to represent the views of residents, business and communities and consult stakeholders and gain their guidance, not just make unilateral decisions that then dictate something, because that isn't democracy, but that is seemingly what's happening here.
But likewise, there was no consultation on the setting of the 2030-45 targets either.
And it's not so much, I'm not talking so much here about the setting of the targets. I'm talking about the fact of scrapping net zero or not. We've got, I think we're getting muddled here with some decisions. We've got these targets of 2030 and 2045, and then we've got the subject of net zero. And the two, yes, are going hand in hand. But you don't just need to scrap net zero. You can look at amending the 2030 or the 2045. The two don't necessarily, they go hand in hand, but they aren't cojoined.
But my,
So be careful on
but
this,
my
people.
point is, those people who are saying, oh, this was not consulted upon and we
Yeah.
didn't go through a whole
But net
process.
zero-
There was no process that went through
Agree.
either to say we're going to do that for 30 and 45 either. They were done by two council
Correct.
resolutions.
I agree with you, but the point I'm making is to if we are going to scrap net zero, which is what is being proposed essentially, that should be consulted on.
Well, I don't think we can scrap net zero because the legal requirement for 2050.
Well, in the guise that it currently is. We can amend the date, if I may continue. I'm also concerned that just saying we're not going to have net zero, even to amend the dates, that there are some potential commercial and social consequences. So, for example, access to funding, inward investment, partnering, suppliers. You know, there are some funding streams and investment criteria that are absolutely dependent on clear climate action strategy and that word, and also not a dumbed down version of it or changing the word, and also net zero strategies and plans. And I can see no analysis, facts and evidence provided that the Cabinet's decision to almost sort of say, we're just going to do away with net zero, and what the potential impact is that on funding and inward investment for et cetera. So some analysis, I would really caution, because I think some analysis needs to be undertaken on that point. There's also no evidence provided, and Martin, you've confirmed this, that for the Cabinet's assertion that achieving these targets are not financially or possible or viable. And I think that the leader said it's not affordable. We just don't know is the truth. And we've established that there is no costed plan to actually base this conclusion on. So, on what has been presented this evening, to me, it looks like the plans and projects also related to climate and net zero, which were set in place by the previous administration, they look set to continue, but just under a different guise or with a different wrapping and words around them. So, in my view, this matter needs to be referred back to Cabinet for a more informed, considered, consulted, detailed and costed discussion and review the current targets, review the current plans in light of sort of national and local changes and challenges and opportunities. But let's not look at this in absolutes of maintain or scrap what is currently there. How about we look at revising or amending based on sound information? So Cabinet, please review this, and in doing so, but base it on facts, evidence, transparency and sound justifications, not subjective opinion, misleading information and unilateral decisions, which appears to be the case at the moment.
Jonathan?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I appreciate those points. And I think just to add to that, whilst the original decision, again, let's not steer entirely about the net zero point, was not consulted on, it was made through a council motion, as you rightly say, there have been a range of subsequent strategies that actually have been consulted on, including the climate strategy, local transport plan, iterations of the local plan and a future version of the local plan. All of those have been consulted on and continue to be consulted on. I have got still some serious concerns about the notion of scrapping the referencing to climate for the reasons I've mentioned earlier. And for clarification, this communication was on the CEO's blog the day after to all staff. And it very clearly says we will remove all reference to climate. Now, I take the point from the monitor officer that that would have to be probably legally checked as it goes through the process and the system. But the initiation of that and the referencing or the removal of climate, I think potentially puts us in some serious situations. I'm particularly concerned about the local plan. It's very clear in the local plan that you have to mitigate and adapt. Mitigate meaning removing emissions, and adapting meaning doing things to cope with heat and all the rest of it taking place.
So, yeah, but we're not discussing the local plan.
No. But there is,
and we better not, by the way, because I think the best way to get it found outside is for us to make.
But there is a key point
wrong judgments about
in this reference and in this decision that I think impacts that, and it's back to the point that Fiona's made. I therefore don't think we have fully thought about the implications and the impacts across the piece. Okay. So there's a financial element, and the financial element, as you know, was looked at as part of the scrutiny meeting at the beginning of the year, and that was the recommendation that came forward. That recommendation is still not being completed to my knowledge, I think endorsed by Martin's comments on that point. So I would echo those comments. I think that is a sensible thing to do, so we know exactly where we stand. 2050, 2030, 24, whatever you want to call it, 2050 is still there. So there is still a requirement for the council to bridge that gap and have an idea about what that plan looks like, even if it sticks at 2050. So let's not worry about the targets bit at the moment. I do worry about how we bridge that gap effectively and how we monitor it. I have one other quick point I want to make. I don't know what economic impacts this will have either from a grant funding point of view or any other inward investment. And Stuart might be able to correct me. I understand that the Rugby World Cup is very focused on sustainability, the Women's Rugby World Cup. And actually, as part of that arrangement, we've been able to secure some EV charge points, I believe, at the stadium. So there are things like that that we potentially will miss opportunities for or not even be considered for. And I think that also is a big impact that at the moment we can't quantify and we probably should have some sense of. So for me, I have no other option but to suggest it needs to be referred back and echo the comments that's been made.
Okay. Sally.
Thank you. I also agree it should be referred back for further consideration. Now, I appreciate I don't have the history in it in West Northamptonshire and this particular policy that my colleagues here do, but it does seem to me that one that there's not evidence here of consultation. Now, I understand you say there wasn't consultation about the previous policy, but there was quite a lot of consultation about different aspects of it. And there was also a tracking of what public opinion was on climate change, which wasn't always wonderful, but it at least meant that the council kept in some kind of step with the public which it serves. And there's also, as we heard today, there's a generational issue about this as well, which I think is really important for local government. Secondly, now, you, Chair, definitely will not agree with me on this, but the previous policy was cross-party. It didn't have unanimous support across the council from everybody, but it was cross-party. And it has to carry through to 2050. And I actually think that it's really important on these mega policies to get some level of coherence between the parties, because at some stage, who knows, power can shift. And the trouble with just scrapping it is that then someone else comes in maybe and they say, oh no, we're going to go in with this or we're going to do that. And what seemed to me to be really good, and I admit that I came to reading it quite late on, what seemed really good about the approach West Northants had taken, it was very measured, it tracked public opinion, it pulled in the partners, especially business community, and it also pulled the parties together as well, which was very important in terms of keeping not just the council, but the whole community online and heading in the same direction. The third thing, and this was the one that in some ways hit me perhaps the most, was that the decision that was taken about scrapping the 2030 and 2045 targets, it was taken quickly and it wasn't evidence-based. I didn't see there a discussion of what was actually happening on emissions, which when you look at it, okay, so it wasn't brilliant, but it was heading in the right direction. It was showing results. So it's not taking that into account. It's also not looking at the finances. And I would argue, I think the idea of having a sort of hypothecated budget just for climate change is not realistic. I think that because you might say, okay, we're going to re-provide the sort of taxi fleet or the whatever fleet, and we're going to re-provide it as electric vehicles, not as diesel. Now, that is something that the council would do in the ordinary course of events. So you might not want to say this is a climate change thing. You might say this is just good practice. And by the way, it's going to be net zero, or it's going to help towards a net zero. So, but I certainly think that we would need to have a better explanation of the financial approach to dealing with this than we got in the paper that came up and the decision was taken on. And the third thing is that we keep on hearing, okay, so we'll still be doing the same thing. We'll do this project, and that project, and that project. Now, I am very skeptical about sort of project-based working because it tends to ping pong around and go to wherever, you know, it follows this money and that money and the other money. And as one of the directors said, that you can often end up picking the low-hanging fruit and the really difficult stuff is up above. And if I can give you an example from anti-poverty work, a lot of anti-poverty work, including, you know, which my own party's done, can show great success because you get the people who are just below the poverty line and you increase their incomes a bit and suddenly you deal with about 50% of poverty, but the really entrenched poverty you don't deal with. And so I think it's really important that you have a strategy that says how you're going to deal with the difficult issues, not how you're just going to warm people's homes because the government gives you money for doing it. And I think, I mean, I understand that Reform wanted to be one of the first councils to scrap net zero. I would much rather see this council being the first council that achieved its target, or being up there amongst the councils and being lauded for good practice, not just for giving up trying. And I think it's that part of doing that is to say, okay, we're going to be part of the government. You know, we've got this legal obligation that we have to do. Here are the steps that we're going to follow. You might have to change the goals a bit if you can't reach them, or you might have to say we're going to work on these areas and we might not work so much on others. And here's a time scale, and here's the and here's how we're going to approach the finances, and then make sure that those of us in the other parties are prepared to compromise so that we can all agree and we can move forward and get the improvements that are needed. Because as I say, in Northampton, you know, we see the results, you know, flooding, climate change, that's where it meets. So we absolutely know that this is not something we can just sit and twiddle our thumbs about, that we have to have a strategy for dealing with it. Yes, we're only part of the solution, but we have huge convening powers. You have huge convening powers, and it's well possible to make a real change to what happened, and also to have a policy and a strategy of which this council can be really proud. So I hope it will go back, there'll be thought, and it can come back again, and we can get a policy that we can all get behind and deliver. Thank you.
Thank you. Cal?
This is all based on this net zero, based on the premises that the climate change is man-made. So if you believe in that, and this is exactly sort of between believing and not believing it, it's like a religion, then of course, it's not facts. It's not facts. Please do not interrupt me.
Please do not interrupt. Please do not interrupt. Do not interrupt. Sorry, Laurie, please, likewise.
And
likewise, do not.
and also I want to, in that paper, Colin paper, you were referring to public procurement and planning system document. And if you read and you use some quotes from this document, and it says actually the planning system should support the transition to net zero. So in legal documents, should is not mandatory. And then it goes on. The need to mitigate and adapt to climate change should also be considered again, should. It's not mandatory. So you have to consider based on what's available. And also, can I just say, there is absolutely massive evidence that this net zero is bankrupting this country. Absolutely bankrupting this country. We are, as a country, only responsible for 0.8 global greenhouse emissions. And all we're doing, we're just essentially exporting these emissions to the rest of the world. And as a result, it sort of resulted in this country being massively deindustrialized, and everything, and countries like China becoming industrial powers. Nothing, whatever you pick these days, nothing is made in this country, pretty much. Very few things are made in this country. Everything, whatever you pick, is made in China. So I'm obviously not in a sort of support.
Sorry, thank you, sir. Please be quiet.
Anecdotal
Calm.
things. I finished, thank you.
Thank you. Right, who's next? Anyone else? Sorry, Dave.
Yeah, it's more in reference with the original proposal. Just something that I want to speak. This is from me. I'd like to apologise for the lack of acronyms and the mention of financial obligations. Climate obligations are not in question here, but the approach must be credible, practical and focused. Councils cannot be expected to achieve the impossible, maintaining roads, collecting waste, delivering statutory services and meeting climate targets, all without the financial support that is needed to achieve them. As mentioned earlier this evening, even the government's own net zero strategy has been ruled unlawful for lacking a clear plan. By choosing to remove interim deadlines, this isn't walking away from climate action, just refusing to indulge in virtual signalling. The legal deadline under the Climate Change Act 2050 remains, and businesses like Aston Martin, Travis Perkins and Mercedes, they already know this. They are driven by regulation, market innovation and investor scrutiny. Our role isn't to mimic their roadmap, it's to shape a place that enables their success. It's also worth reflecting on whether membership of the UK 100 is worthwhile or whether our efforts are better spent on local priorities. And we speak of leadership. I too have served globally and in multiple conflict zones during my military career. And I know that leadership means making tough decisions based on reality and not wishful thinking. True leadership means focusing on what we can achieve, reliable services, stronger infrastructure and environmental care that makes sense locally, not merely ticking boxes. Finally, let's remember targets alone do not shape outcomes. Leadership does, strategy does, delivery does. Removing an interim date does not remove our direction, it removes distraction. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Right. Yeah, if you want to clarify a couple of points, because I'm going to take what's been said here as a proposal for referral back.
Again, purely for clarification, I believe that there's only 1/3 of councils that have actually set a net zero target in ahead of the 2050. So when we're looking at funding, I've seen no evidence that suggests that that funding would be minimised or reduced as a result of this decision. So it's around about 100, I think it is, councils that have set that particular target. Again, in terms of the funding side and getting a funded programme, the biggest challenge with that, and if you look at our spend over the last 4 years, most of that has come from government grant that we haven't been able to foresee into the future. So if you look at the leisure centre building side of things, we got £7 million there. That was a one-off programme of funding that we were able to maximise. If you look at the buses, again, a significant amount of funding that we weren't expecting at that particular time. So it is a very difficult task to get a full financial plan with any certainty behind it. So again, just a couple of clarifications there. In terms of the local plan, I know, Chair, you said, I will ensure, my job is to ensure it's legal and as it goes forward. So again, please be assured that in anything of the local plan, it will be a legal document as it goes, because that's the first test, as you rightly say, any inspector would look at.
Okay. Jonathan.
Yeah, so just to come back on that point, so I go back to my original comment. As it stands at the moment, whether it's in the decision document or the communication that subsequently followed it, there is a clear mandate that's been issued, which is to remove all references to climate and substitute it with something else. That is a key problem for the reasons that I've outlined and you've just talked about from a local plan point of view. I understand your role obviously as an officer and your role as an officer to make sure that it is legally compliant, but as it currently stands, that isn't how it looks or sounds or smells. So that's the first point I would make. The comment about inward investment, we don't know the reality of the asset. And actually, in terms of my view, I think it's the same as Fiona. I'm not asking you to produce a budget for it. What we're asking you to do is to follow the recommendation that was made at the Scrutiny Committee at the beginning of the year, which is to actually look at the overall impact or costing assessment. That doesn't mean we're asking you to find the money for it. It's a different thing. What we're asking you to do as part of that work, which is still outstanding, it was agreed to at that committee to scope it.
I don't think Cabinet, though, accepted the recommendation, did they?
I think they did.
Did they?
Yeah,
I
they
can't remember,
accepted
is the honest
all
answer.
four.
Okay. Yeah.
They accepted all of those recommendations, which went forward, I think,
Yeah.
beginning of March. So that's as straightforward as that from my point of view. I also think it has to be mentioned. I would love to, if you don't mind, sharing the absolutely massive evidence source that's bankrupting the country. I mean, seriously, really.
But has it been costed? Like, I've seen figures of trillions, many trillions of people arguing.
There's a very wide band range of figures.
Yeah, exactly. And no, we haven't, for instance, costed what it would do to the 12,000 council house stock. We've done a few hundred to improve their, but we haven't costed the full. We haven't costed the full cost up to this council of bringing every one of those 12,000 houses up to standard.
If I might, I don't think that that is in question. I think the point that's being made is we've got comments being made in this room and things like absolutely massive evidence that net zero is bankrupting this country. Okay. I think people need to be really very careful when they are throwing out glib comments that are foundationless and presenting them as truth, because there is not absolutely massive evidence. And if there is,
I can
and
point
if
you
there
to that
is-
evidence.
And if there is, could you please send everybody on this committee?
But we're
an
not here
e-
to discuss the nation
No,
finances.
but I'm asking for now because a point has been made, absolutely massive evidence, this is a quote, that net zero is bankrupting this country. Please, unless you can back something up with an evidential basis, please refrain from saying it because it is giving misinformation. So please, can you provide us all with links to this massive
Point
evidence?
taken.
Thank you.
Let's crack on. Sally. Do you want to-
Point about the impact of climate change spending. The OECD's assessed the potential costs of climate change on the UK economy, finding that while strong mitigation policies can significantly reduce these costs, the UK's economy is still projected to experience substantial financial impacts from climate change. In other words, what we spend on mitigating climate change strengthens the resilience of the economy. That's OECD. It is not bankrupting the country. It's future-proofing it. And if we get to the housing, the UK has got one of the oldest housing stocks in Europe, question mark, possibly the world. And we have got some of the worst housing. We've got, what did that figure say? About 22% of the homes don't comply with the
I
decent
don't
homes
argue with
standard.
that.
Now, those are
My
things
point
that-
is,
but
we've
those are
never
things-
costed it.
Well, that can be costed. That can be costed because each property, there's estimations it's £7,000 each to get it up to the decent home standards, which includes a kind of insulation that's needed to future-proof it against climate change.
Well, within the
and reduce energy
sustainability
costs.
reports that we have
That's-
produced as a council,
Okay.
the averages on the few hundred we've done are much higher than 7.
You could ask
we
the
are.
people sitting next to you how much it would cost to deal.
Well, I
with
can't
it.
ask,
It's
but I
very
suspect the answer is you don't
I'm
know,
sorry,
so
can
we've
we
never done
come
the
back
work.
on topic
But yes,
here?
exactly. So
Okay.
can one of you 2, 3 give me a formal recommendation here for referral back? Because I take it, well, sorry, I don't think anybody else wants to speak. So sorry, Michael.
Sorry, I'm just getting a bit sort of caught up in the discussion here because we keep going back and looping around to different things. I'm sympathetic to the situation. I appreciate all the public that have come in and spoken today. You know, it's been commendable. And I've heard all the policyholders and the officers speak as well. You know, of course, you know, net zero is a thing. You know, it's not made up, it's a real thing. But my understanding is that the previous administration decided to move away from climate and didn't have any targets, no KPIs, no benchmarks, no steps forward for it in the report that I saw. And it was looking more towards 2045 because 2030 wasn't achievable. And then, you know, we've come in, we're looking at it, and we look at the benchmark for net zero, which is benchmarked at 1990 figures, yeah, which is about, what, 314 parts per million or 350 parts per million. It's now at 411 parts per million, yeah. So, yeah, of course it's there. But I have to look at it from my point of view, as a realist, okay? And the realness in the situation, the facts are, whether you look at the different conversations regarding the finances, you've talked about the finances, you talked about Stuart and about the finances, sorry, Martin, sorry, where you can't say one way or the other whether it's going to bankrupt. And, you know, the cabinet members have information. They're looking at the financial side. I'm not on the finance committee, so I don't sit on that. I don't deal with that.
This is the finance committee.
This is the scrutiny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of finance.
Oh, okay. Okay, pardon me. Yeah. So with that in mind, and the fact that you know, there isn't the financial funds there to look at that plan going forward, and as the monitoring officer has already said, that it's all legal and above board, and everything's been done in line with the Constitution. Yeah. So for me, I have to disagree. You know, if there's no finance there to sustain it, and the plan is in place, and it's not taking away that Climate Act of 2008, where it states that by 2050 we have to reach net zero. Yeah, is that right? Is that what it states?
Yeah.
If I'm wrong, tell me. Somebody shoot me. You know. But
Well, the 2008 Act, which I think is the one you're talking about, originally said we had to get to, I think, 80%, and then the Theresa May government changed it to 100% by 2050.
That's right, 100%, because you can't get to net zero because the benchmark is 1990.
I think so.
That's
But,
correct.
but the council benchmark that we've been looking at is 21, 22.
Chair, I
Sorry.
mean, I'd agree with quite a bit of what you said.
Okay.
Yeah.
The thing I think, I mean, I agree about the need for KPIs. That's why I
Yeah.
think it needs to go back. So you have some kind of a roadmap, because if you take out the 2030 and 2045, which if people want to do because it's not achievable, then kind of, you know, I think,
yeah.
but I still think you
Okay.
need something, and because otherwise you just ping pong around and you pick up different projects and you don't know where it's going.
Okay, I think
And I think you need a proper roadmap with proper KPIs or whatever you want to call it, target or goals or.
KPIs, targets. So yeah, I understand, and stepstones towards that level where you're going. I understand that, but ultimately, if you've got no money, you've got no finance to pay for the infrastructure and the grid and everything else that's sitting there.
You've got this council spends close on £1 billion in Broad. I mean, obviously that includes schools budget and some stuff like that. It has got a shed. We might not have all the money we want. However, in my book, £500 million is a huge amount of money to spend on services. And within that, it's about shaping the spend so that you make sure that the services you provide are done in the way that best prevents the catastrophic climate changes that will impact on us in the future. It doesn't mean it's perfect, because that's not life, but you can do it carefully and you can make real gains.
I appreciate that, and that's why we're here to debate this whole situation, which is, it's good to have a good debate, you know, because I know that emotions throughout the evening have run quite high on both sides mainly, but more on the side of, yes, we need to send it back. And with regard to money and a shed load of money, I think you're going to say shed load, you pulled it back, which is good. But for some people, you know, 15, 20 pounds, if a person's in poverty, 15 or 20 pounds is a lot of money. That's a shed load to them. Is it going to get them off the street? No. Is it going to give them a house? No. Is it going to give them fire? Is it going to give them all the things they want? No. I know you're going to talk about it. No, not at all.
If you give them
right?
cheap energy, then you've done something. And if you can get cheap energy through, or you can cut their fuel bills by.
At the moment, we're living in an age where a lot of people, a lot of the residents that I represent, are finding it very difficult with the costs, you know, the living cost crisis, if you like, that's imposed at the moment. And a lot of people have got extra costs on top of them with, you know, private estate management companies with ground rents for their freehold properties, which they're not getting the service for. That's important for them at the moment. Of course, some of these people, these residents that have, you know, concerns about these costs, have also committed to solar power and EV chargers and EV cars. Of course they have. But I have to disagree on the basis, and I can't, you know, I can't vote for it to be sent back. I'm content with the action that's been taken place. That's my personal point of view. Okay, I'm content with it because I think it's the right thing to do. And yes,
roadmap, everything else put in place. But at this time, no. We need to look at it and try to work towards that 2050, and then we can reevaluate. That's, okay, that's right. So thank you, Chair.
So can we have a proposal then for referral back?
I have a couple of just additional comments if I may.
Can you make them quickly then?
Yeah. So a couple of things. The net zero economy is the fastest growing economy in the UK by 10.1%. If you compare that to any of the other sectors in the UK, and it contributes about £83.1 billion in gross value to the UK economy. So let's not have nonsense talk about its value and its contribution to the economy. The second point, if we are able to, and it sounds like the administration is keen to, use the government-funded money for warm homes, great, because it's government money, that will make a contribution to people's health and well-being. And there is an estimate that if we could improve high energy and create better efficient houses by that time, we could probably prevent in the UK something like 650,000 cases of childhood asthma. These are very good, sound reasons to do the right things. So I'm relieved to hear that you're not going to throw that money away or do something wrong with that issue. The other point I want to make is it's been mentioned at the beginning through the calling process, and it's not really relevant to a refer back, but I do have a problem with the Cabinet that publishes a decision before it's voted on it. That is a basic, and surely that is something that at least the monitoring officer would maybe have a quiet word about. That is not democracy. What is the point of encouraging members of the public, other councillors to take the opportunity to come along and raise their points if they're ignored because the decision's already made and it's in the press? That is a basic for me. So from a refer back, give us a minute, we'll have a conversation about it.
I take your point on the timing of the article in the Telegraph. I suspect there was a press release issued with an embargo, and because of the disturbance that we had here, the embargo.
7 minutes past 6, we hadn't even started the meeting.
Went.
But 7
Well, I
minutes
think it was
past
6:54.
No,
I thought was the
7
time
minutes,
you said.
7 minutes
Well,
past 6.
I don't know. I didn't issue it. I didn't say it. Anyway, can we? I just want to get to the point. I'm
Can I
just
give a
conscious of the fact we're
vote?
10
Would
o'clock.
that be helpful?
Well, you can give
Would
me a
that be
proposal.
Okay, yeah. Okay, we move that this be referred back to the Cabinet. The reasons being that there's a requirement for an evidence-based strategy with milestones to achieve the 2050 net zero goal set in statute, and to continue the engagement with external partners in the public sector, in local businesses, and with the community. Does that fit?
Okay. Do we have a seconder?
Okay, costed.
Jonathan.
Okay, sorry, with reasons required, no, I'll put it this way. For an evidence-based strategy with an approach to financing, so that sets out the approach. It doesn't put pounds, shillings and pence, excuse my age, but without the pounds and pence in, but so that the finance people can set out the financial approach with milestones to achieve the 2050 net zero goal, legal goal, and to continue engagement with external partners in public sector, business community, and the wider community.
Yeah, you got all that,
Okay.
Tracy?
Because I think you need the reasons, don't you? You need what's required.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
need the
that's
reasons. So
fine.
what I
That's
put. Okay,
and
you're
that's
happy with that?
pretty clear. It sounds like the same scrutiny recommendation that was made in February, to some extent. Right. So proposed by Sally, seconded by Jonathan. Can we have? You've said nothing all night, Dan, which is uncharacteristic. Do you want to say?
He's being patient.
Oh, okay, that's fine. I don't want anybody to feel that they haven't had the opportunity to speak, and you're not a shrinking violet normally, so you can normally get your elbows out if you need to. So everybody else happy before we move to a vote on this? So can we have those in favour of the recommendation to refer back? 4. Those against? 1, 2, 3, 5. And I'm not voting. So that is lost. So I suppose by default then, we go for no further action. Yeah. Yeah, so there are only two options. So we're not referring back by default. We've gone for, well, I'm not taking a side on this one. I'm just going to allow it facilitate the discussion. Actually, madam, I believe you're banned from the building and we've tolerated your presence. Yeah, sorry. Sorry, I need to formally close the meeting at 10.